On September 15, 2007, a rock fell out of the sky in southeastern Peru. Within hours, nearly 200 people were sick. Police officers who responded to the crater were later hospitalized. Scientists arrived in face masks, but the fumes cut through them anyway. Livestock began bleeding from the nose. Some of the animals died. The Peruvian Nuclear Energy Institute sent an engineer to test for radiation. He found none. The regional health department sent a director to assess the site. He became ill despite the mask. Then a team of doctors drove 3.5 hours from the nearest city, examined the villagers, and concluded that nothing at the crater had made them sick, but something had. What we know about atmospheric physics meant that this type of meteorite never should have reached the ground. Bizarrely, the crater was left to erode into nothing. The government's geological report was completed and withheld from the public for a week, for reasons never stated. And the medical follow-up that was announced at the press briefing, which would include blood tests, neurological exams, and months of monitoring, it was never mentioned again in any published source. The closest witness, a man who was just a few hundred feet away, was never even asked his name. We know what fell from the sky and landed in the soil of Carancas that day. What no one could explain was what came after. The village of Carancas sits on the high Andean plain near the shore of Lake Titicaca, roughly 1,000 kilometers southeast of Lima. The population is about 3,000, mostly farmers and shepherds who tend alpacas and sheep. There's a single dirt road. There are no fences. There is no reason anyone would have heard of Carancas. Saturday, 11:40 a.m., a fireball appeared in the sky. Witnesses 12 miles away said they could see it in the middle of the day. A local radio host watched the object descend behind a hilltop statue of Jesus. He ran to his station and announced that a UFO had arrived. One witness told reporters that even before it hit the ground, the sound was already there, like an airplane. When it struck, the ground moved beneath her, her animals scattered in every direction. Nobody in Carancas had a framework for what was happening. They reached for the ones they did have. War, gods, aliens. None of them were right. But the official explanations that came later weren't right either. The meteorite hit the Earth at somewhere between 7,000 and 13,000 miles per hour. The explosion was heard 12 miles away. The windows of a health center shattered a half-mile away from the impact. An empty shack 400 feet to the west was pelted with ejected soil. A piece of debris punched a hole through the roof of an adobe house 500 feet away. A llama near the impact site was killed by the shockwave. And then there was a man on a bicycle. He was approximately 330 feet from the point of impact. He was knocked to the ground, dizzied. He didn't sustain any other injuries. The impact registered a 1.5 on the Richter scale. The first people to reach the crater were farmers. A local farmer brought the police and the mayor, and the small town gathered at the site. What they found was a hole in the ground, circular, roughly 45 feet across and more than 15 feet deep. The earth was scorched at the edges. The meteorite had struck directly above an underground spring. Groundwater was already seeping in, and the water was boiling. Witnesses reported it boiled for approximately 10 minutes. A column of smoke or steam rose from the hole. The air around the crater reeked of sulfur. Villagers who approached the rim began picking up black rock fragments scattered in the ejected soil. Some of the fragments were still smoking. The son of someone from the town called after hearing the radio broadcast announcing the arrival of the UFO. He called and warned his father that the site, the rocks, they were contaminated. By the time the warning arrived, dozens of people had been handling the rocks and breathing the fumes for hours. So had the police. Within hours, the first reports began. Headaches, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, skin irritation, respiratory problems. By the end of the first day, roughly 200 villagers had reported symptoms. Over the days that followed, more than 600 people in total would visit the crater. But it was the earliest arrivals who were hit the hardest. Physicians had to set up auxiliary medical tents at the Carancas Health Center. The police who responded were not spared. 7 or 8 officers were among the worst affected. They were taken to the hospital, given oxygen, put on intravenous fluids. Something was physically wrong with these officers. Jorge Lopez, director of the regional health department, went to the crater personally, wearing a face mask. He wasn't spared. His nose and throat were irritated despite the protection. This is the same official who would later announce that the health of impacted villagers would be monitored. Cattle and sheep in the area stopped eating. Livestock bled through their noses. Justina Limash, 74, told reporters that when she heard the roar from the sky, she abandoned her flock and ran home to her 8-year-old granddaughter. After the impact, small rocks rained onto her roof for several minutes. She was scared it was going to collapse. 20 local school children were examined. The results were not published. Villagers stopped drinking from nearby water sources. Authorities discussed declaring a state of emergency. 4 days after impact, most villagers reported having recovered, but nothing was resolved. The illness was simply over. The questions were not. There were 4 theories. None of them survived scrutiny intact. Renan Ramirez, engineer with the Peruvian Nuclear Energy Institute, tested the site and found no radiation. He speculated the sickness was caused by sulfur, arsenic, or other toxins vaporized by the extreme heat of the impact. Others speculated that the meteorite's hot surface reacted with the underground water supply, which was known to contain arsenic. When the water boiled, the arsenic went airborne. Some urine tests on the sick reportedly showed elevated arsenic, but later analysis found the arsenic content in the crater water was not significantly different from the local drinking supply. If the arsenic was always there, why were people getting sick now? A competing theory pointed to troilite, a sulfur-bearing mineral present in large quantities in the meteorite itself. Troilite melts at relatively low temperatures under impact pressure. When vaporized, it produces exactly the kind of fumes witnesses described. If this theory is correct, it means any meteorite impact into wet ground could be a mass exposure event. There is no policy anywhere in the world that accounts for this. Jorge Lopez, director of the regional health department, offered the simplest explanation. He called it collective psychosis or mass hysteria. Ursula Marvin, a meteor expert at the Smithsonian, was skeptical of the gas theory altogether. A meteorite impact is superficial, she said. It wouldn't produce much gas from the Earth. And a team of doctors examined the villagers and found no evidence the meteorite had caused illness. But they had arrived days after the impact. No one agreed on what happened. Then everyone moved on. The rock itself was a separate problem. On September 18th, a volcanologist confirmed it was a chondrite meteorite. On September 20th, a Bolivian university lab published its fragment analysis: iron, nickel, cobalt, traces of iridium. Proportions incompatible with any rock found on Earth's surface. The University of Arizona classified it as a stony meteorite, composed of broken fragments fused together by ancient collisions in space. Its mineral signature included kamacite, which occurs naturally only in meteorites. On September 21st, Peru's Geological Institute, INGAMET, completed an internal report, but they did not release it to the public for a week. The delay coincided exactly with the period when the illness was unresolved and international media coverage was at its most intense. And the physics problem kept scientists awake. Stony chondrites are not supposed to do what this one did. When a stony meteoroid enters Earth's atmosphere, the standard model says it decelerates in fragments. The aerodynamic stress at high altitude forces the object to break apart. The pieces that typically reach the ground are falling at terminal velocity, a few hundred miles per hour. They do not make craters. The Carancas meteorite did. Dr. Peter Schultz of Brown University analyzed acoustical data and determined the object hit the ground at roughly 10,000 miles per hour. The result was a shock-produced crater, more like a small explosion equivalent to 2 or 3 tons of TNT. One model suggested the meteoroid was monolithic, free of internal cracks, which would explain how it resisted atmospheric breakup. There were only 2 other crater-forming events. The other 2 were iron meteorites, but Carancas is the only stony meteorite observed to make a crater in all of human history. And then there was what happened to the village. Some believed the meteorite was a sign of good fortune. Others believed it was an object from the celestial spirit world. The mayor called a meeting to explain the official narrative, the largest gathering the village had ever held. Scientists explained that a meteorite had fallen. Some people accepted this. Others believed the rock had been summoned by the gods as a bad omen. The local shaman claimed that the object had turned the land malignant. They needed to make a sacrifice to restore balance. A baby llama. The community voted to fence the crater and organized 12-hour guard shifts day and night. Guard details were large, a couple dozen villagers each, camping under open sky. The mayor directed them to be vigilant. He was not entirely sure against what. 2 weeks after impact, the meteorite hunters arrived. Police officers produced fragments from their pockets and sold them, but the hunters wanted more. They advised the town to pump water out of the crater to preserve the remainder of the object. They consecrated the negotiation with a llama offering burned in fire, a gesture to the mountain spirit. The next day, villagers assembled with a water pump and hand shovels. By November 2007, when a reporter visited the crater, the bottom was filled with murky, dark water. By 2014, the crater was photographed and found to be eroding. No preservation effort had ever been made beyond the original fence. The only impact crater formed by a stony meteorite, the single most unusual impact event in modern scientific history, had decayed into the landscape. No one has published a photographic update since 2014. The crater is almost certainly gone. Something came out of the ground in Carancas on September 15, 2007. It sickened hundreds, killed livestock. It burned through masks and survived the investigation of 4 institutions. But no one knows what truly happened. 18,000 meteorites strike the Earth every year. Most of them disappear into oceans or empty land. The one that hit Carancas did not. It fell beside 3,000 people, opened the Earth, and left behind a question that no one could answer. But whatever made people sick that day passed through Carancas without ever being fully explained. Next time, it may not land somewhere so remote.